Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Monday, March 18th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to catch up with Jacob Hall and talk about what he's been up to at the South by Southwest Film Festival. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta. And joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Managing Editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, Peter. I am back. I am tired, and I feel like I've come home from a journey, even though I never left Austin.
Yeah, welcome back. You have, how long was South by going on for? 10 days?
9 days for the film fest.
9 days.
And then, there's also the interactive portion, which all the tech stuff happens before it. Then the music stuff, which goes a little bit past the film. And then I also found time to hit up the South by Southwest Gaming Expo, which runs during the final portion of the fest as well. So it was a very, very busy week plus.
Yeah. And you missed a lot of stuff while you were gone. You missed James Gunn. Did you hear this, Jacob? James Gunn was rehired by Disney.
I was sitting in the Austin airport parking lot waiting to pick up Slash Film's own Chris Evangelista from his flight when my phone blew up with that news.
Yeah, insane. Okay, let's get into it. Let's dive into it and talk about some of the stuff, the best and worst you've seen at the festival. But before we get into that, actually, I know you wanted to talk about some smaller stuff that didn't quite make your list, but you wanted to mention and get on people's radars.
Yes, I made a top 10 of my favorite films at the fest, but there's a few things that don't quite fit the criteria for that or barely missed it. And I want to start with the AMC television adaptation of Joe Hill's novel Nosferatu, spelled N-O-S, number 4, number 2.
Yeah, good luck Googling that.
Exactly.
Joe Hill is the son of author Stephen King?
Yeah, and even though he's carved out a career very distinctive from his father. He also writes horror novels, and even though Nosferatu is in many ways a tribute to his father, it is the most King-like of his work. He is a very different writer in a lot of ways, and I was worried that the AMC adaptation of his show would maybe get the horror right, get the grotesqueness of it right, but miss what makes the book really emotional, which is that despite all the supernatural stuff, the book is really about how hard it is to love somebody who hurts you, and it deals with abusive parents and how abusive parents from different angles, like the main character dealing with a mother who genuinely wants the best for her but does not support her dreams, a father who supports every step of the way but is physically abusive to her mother, and it nails these emotional beats in a way that left me genuinely moved. So when the horror creeps in and the supernatural elements creep in, I was so on board for where it went. And the series stars Ashley Cummings as the lead character from the book, Vic, short for Victoria, who is this sort of blue-collar girl living in New England who wants to be an artist. And she learns that she has a supernatural ability to find missing things, which puts her on the radar of Charlie Manx, a psychic vampire who abducts children, devours their souls to stay young, and stores their empty husks in an alternate dimension called Christmas Land, which he's built to be a place of utmost happiness for children, even though it's incredibly creepy and upsetting. So the book's about the showdown between various superpowered individuals who all have these very distinct, specific, abilities and powers, and the show is interestingly showrun and directed by women, which gives this whole thing this very sensitive portrayal of everything that makes it feel unlike most horror shows out there, which I feel are very masculine driven and very male driven. And I feel like you can, even though Joe Hill's a man, giving his material to women, I think they've really mined it for the emotions that I think a lot of typical horror creators may have missed.
This sounds pretty cool, and I guess it's going to premiere on AMC sometime this year. They haven't announced a release date. Is that correct?
Yeah, they have not announced one yet. It's coming this year. I'm not sure how long the first season is, but they did say the plan right now is if AMC gives them the green light, they're going to make it 3 seasons, with each season covering a third of the book. And if you've read the book, the first third actually has a pretty clean break-off point. So I'm very excited to see where this goes. I'll be watching it for sure.
When we were talking about our most anticipated TV shows of 2019, one of the shows that made the list is the adaptation of What We Do in the Shadows, the Taika Waititi mockumentary. Is it a mockumentary?
Yeah, I guess that's the right term, mockumentary or faux documentary or whatever people are calling it these days.
Yeah. And so this is well, can you tell us about the TV show? Because is it a straight up remake of the movie?
It's strange because it's not a remake. It's meant to take place in the same universe, but instead of in Wellington, New Zealand, we follow a group of vampire roommates living in Staten Island, New York City. And like the vampires in the original film, they are very much inspired by, the classic Eastern European tropes of the vampire and how they dress, act, and the accents, but they've also adjusted to life in a in their very modern cities and is trying to get by. And it's strange because whenever the pilot episode, which was when they screened, whenever it tries to like replicate very similar laughs to the original movie, whenever it's trying to recreate moments we all loved or touch on things that are familiar, like make it a reference, it falls completely flat. But whenever it really digs into doing new stuff and tries to be a completely fresh thing with fresh characters and fresh concepts, it's very, very funny. I mean, it's very much a pilot. I think too much of the first half hour is all about establishing plot, establishing the rules of this universe, and trying to do a greatest hits collection of the movie. But if the second and third episode can, get away from the film a little bit more and focus more on, creating funny situations as opposed to establishing who everyone is, I'll be watching this. It's a funny half hour. Sometimes it's very funny, and it's better than all the trailers. I'll give it that much. It plays a lot better in context.
And this isn't something that's just like produced by Taika Waititi. He actually directed the pilot episode that you watched, and I think Jermaine Clement directs the second episode. This series will premiere on FX, I guess, in a couple weeks.
Yes, and I don't know what FX's rules are right now, but the version we saw screened had copious amounts of blood. It was like the movie was very violent and had a fair number of very funny F-bombs. So I don't know what FX's rules about swearing are these days, but I'm really hoping that at least some version that's made available will have all that intact.
They've definitely done blood before, so I'm not sure about the F-bombs. A lot of networks nowadays, like I feel like Mr. Robot had some F-bombs last season. Like they're pushing the boundaries. I feel like there's that's always something that like these cable channels kind of like just all agreed upon, but it was never like a FCC law to not have F-bombs on cable. Yeah, so it's we'll have to see. Okay, there's one other thing you wanted to mention until we get into your top 10.
This is a movie that barely missed my top 10, but I still want to give it a shout out. It's called Extraordinary, not Extraordinary, but Extra Space Ordinary, and it is a almost really, really good supernatural comedy. Essentially follows, it's an Irish film, an Irish comedy, and directed by Mike Ahern and Enda Lauman. And the basic premise is that the three main characters, one of whom is she can speak to ghosts. She inherited the ability to speak to the dead from her father, but she's retired from trying to talk to ghosts. And in this world, there are hauntings everywhere. Like a trash can is haunted, a rock inside the road is haunted. So everybody, whether they know it or not, is surrounded by ghosts, and everything they have around them is haunted. It's just a question of whether or not they know of it. And she's trying to leave life behind her. And there's a character who is a widower who's being haunted by his dead wife, who is just constantly trying to control and micromanage his life from beyond the grave. And there's an American rock star played by Will Forte, who's summoning demons in an attempt to get his career back on track after being a one-hit wonder in the 80s. And the first two storylines are really, really fun. The actors are fantastic and have sort of dry wit. And when they meet and start, having this sort of rom-com romance, it's very sweet. And I was really on board for their sort of, for their relationship and how they both have this extremely low-key, hauntings and ghosts are actually kind of boring approach to their lives. But Will Forte is this disastrous casting in this. It's like if Will Ferrell playing Ron Burgundy walked into the British office and just started not toning it down at all. And this didn't make my top 10 because of Will Forte, and I adore the man. He was in maybe 3 or 4 films at South by Southwest this year. And I can recommend Extraordinary, especially to pretty much anybody who likes anything that blends horror and comedy. But I feel like they are one casting choice away from this being like an instant indie must see.
I will say it's one of the highest rated things on IMDb out of the festival, strangely. This movie, I don't even think has gotten picked up yet, so we don't know when this is going to premiere.
Yeah, not yet. I'm hoping it gets picked up because there's a vibe here that I'm really digging, and I'm not alone in thinking that Forte ruins the movie or comes close to it. But a lot of people also enjoyed him in it, so I think that we'll have a chance to see it, whether that's just for streaming or just straight to VOD at some point. But I can't imagine it vanishing off the face of the earth, especially with Will Forte in it.
Okay, we're about to get into your top 10 list prior. Actually, before that, did you want to talk about the one film that you saw that you hated?
Okay, I saw films I disliked at the fest, but I generally don't want to dwell on the undistributed smaller films that I didn't care for. I wrote small reviews of everything I saw. You can see that all in Slash Films linked in the show notes. But the one major premiere that I straight up disliked, Peter, and I was worried I could have been alone, but Meredith Borders wrote a full review for us, and she agreed, which is The Curse of La Llorona, the latest film in the Conjuring universe, which was confirmed at the premiere before the screening even started. It's a straight up bad movie, Peter, and as somebody who's enjoyed every single Conjuring movie, the core entries, both Annabelle films, even The Nun, I'm a super fan of those movies, and will defend even the weaker ones. This is an undefensible piece of junk. It is.
Why? What's so bad about it?
Okay. Imagine the Conjuring formula. We all know what the Conjuring formula is, which is there's a haunting, there are lots of jump scares, there's a family in trouble, a investigator of some kind comes in to save the day. All the things we've seen in pretty much all the other Conjuring movies, except that when I think of the Conjuring 1 and 2, I will think of the jump scares, the effective jump scares that James Wan builds in those, but I will first think of the specificity of the hauntings, how specific the ghosts or demonic threats are, and how they deal with them. I think of the characters. I think of how Ed and Lorraine Warren, the characters played by Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson in those movies, are characters who I can root for, how they're so in love with each other. They care about the people who are trying to help. They make mistakes. They bounce back, and we're rooting for them. And I think of the climax of the Conjuring 2, where there's a massive cast of characters all experiencing their own miniature arcs inside the larger film, where lots of stuff is happening, and I care about all of it. La Llorona is just jump scares. It is 90 minutes of people being thrown across rooms with loud volume. I cannot tell you a single thing about any of the main characters. I cannot tell you anything about the supernatural expert who shows up to help them. They introduce him as being an ex-priest who left the church because he was too extreme, and then he just doesn't do anything. Like he doesn't have any character. He doesn't seem too extreme. He doesn't seem like interesting at all. No decent dialogue. No character traits I can recount to you now. And even though La Llorona herself, who is an actual Latin American folktale, you would think that to be some sort of specificity, something here that would make this unique. But you could remove her from the movie entirely, replace her with any generic ghost made up, and nothing would change. Even the main character, who's a white woman whose Hispanic husband was killed in line of duty as a police officer, she's raising two mixed-race kids in 1970s Los Angeles. And the movie has this window dressing of, Latin culture and Mexican characters, but it never delves into it. It never – I kept waiting for the movie to explore this in some way, about how here's a white woman who has to protect her, mixed-race Hispanic kids from a boogeyman that is specific to their culture and heritage that she's never had to deal with. I mean, if you have to have a white character lead a Hispanic story, you could at least engage with that, engage with how she has to protect her children by learning about the culture that she could walk away from, but they can't. And that's a great seed for a horror film, and all horror is a great metaphor. All great horror tells a story beyond being scary, but it never does, Peter. It never once engages with any sort of subtext, with any sort of commentary. It just says, hey, if you're Hispanic, you've heard of this ghost before. Now she's going to jump out at you very loudly 20 times. And my director, Michael Chavez, has been hired to make The Conjuring 3, and I know James Wan is off making billion-dollar superhero movies now, even as he produces these, but I really hope he reconsiders, or somebody at New Line and WB reconsiders, because he feels like a disastrous choice for Conjuring 3. There's nothing here that says he can make a horror movie where I give a damn about anyone in it.
Okay, Let's actually talk about some films that you love.
I love some movies, Peter. I really did.
And we've done 15 minutes before we've actually gotten to your top 10. So this episode's probably going to run long. But let's start with your number 10, which is Olympic Dreams.
Olympic Dreams is a fascinating movie. It's directed by Jeremy Teacher, and he was offered a artist fellowship by the Olympic Games, and so he used it by embedding himself at the Winter Olympics in South Korea last year, where he hired comedian Nick Kroll and athlete turned actress Alexi Pappas, who competed in 2016 games in Rio, to be the only fictional characters in the movie. He, the director, Teacher himself, was a one-man camera crew. He carried all the sound equipment himself. He strapped on microphones to Kroll and Pappas, and then with a very loose story structure, they went behind the scenes at the Olympic Village, where only the athletes are allowed. No coaches, no family, no press, and it's about a Olympian played by Pappas who, on day one of the Winter Olympics, fails to place and does quite poorly in her competition, and Kroll, playing a lovelorn volunteer doctor from the United States volunteering in Olympic Village, they both meet. They have this sort of lost in translation-esque, friendship that blossoms into being something, profound, where they find each other in their own loneliness. And the entire movie is them essentially wandering through the Olympic Village, having conversations, connecting, and as we learned in the Q&A, all the other characters are actual athletes who would be roped into the scenes at the last second and ask you to come play yourself for a second. And they improvised where the story goes, improvised most of the dialogue, and they recorded all the sound on scene, surrounded by hundreds of athletes who did not know they were in the movie. And the result, even when it kind of hits some very cliched indie beats, and there are moments in the movie that don't work at all, and I feel like they kind of back themselves into some corners by not having a script and sort of improvising their way into cliches. The thrill of seeing these two, who are very good together, wander through a place that we never get to see, the actual Olympic Village, and interact with athletes who are actually playing themselves and really sharing their hopes and dreams and giving us insight into what it means to be an Olympian. It is fascinating. And Kroll, being a comedian, he's so good-natured and fun that he brings out the best in these athletes. So even when they're not actors, he's making them look better by being next to him. And it is, if you're a fan of just experimental filmmaking that somehow works as a narrative, this is a really fascinating thing.
You're saying all the right things to make me interested in this. I love, Lost in Translation. I was even fascinated by that, years ago at Sundance, they had this film that was shot undercover at Disneyland that was called Escape from Tomorrow, I think.
Yeah, I saw that at Fantastic Fest. That movie's crazy.
Yeah, it's a crazy movie. It's a really experimental. It's not a good movie, but I remember coming out of that screening being taken by the, just the concept. So I'm wondering, is this actually a good movie? Or is it you're so enthralled in how it was made?
It's such a good question. I mean, even during the Q&A, the sound mixer was there talking about how he used the most advanced sound editing equipment in all of Hollywood to make sure they could use the raw dialogue. And I was fascinated by the Q&A just as much as the movie. And so I've given this a lot of thought because there are certain decisions in the movie, that storytelling decisions, that I learned after the fact were improv in the moment, and they don't work at all. And they're the weakest moments of the movie. But the stuff that does work, the stuff that left me charmed and heartbroken and warm all over, was also improvised by the actors and the director on the spot. So it's just this crazy experiment that, if you did not know how it was made and did not know the Olympic Village was such a place that was off limits to cameras, then I think you watch it and enjoy it just fine as this really charming, indie movie. But knowing how it was made just enhances it to the point where if you like filmmaking and like the nuts and bolts of it, you need to see this.
Okay. Well, I'm going to add this to my watch list on my Letterboxd account, which, by the way, this is, I think the purpose of a podcast like this is put these films on the radar of, people listening out there, because, these are films that, some of them might blow up. Some of these might become huge hits. We've had that in South by in the past, but some of these might be just, gems that if you didn't hear about them somehow, you had to, come across in some weird, strange, way. Jacob saying all these films are worth your time. I'm going to add some of them to my list, the ones that sound interesting to me. Actually, the next one also sounds interesting to me. I know we talked about this before, and this is the Peanut Butter Falcon.
Yeah, the Peanut Butter Falcon. The running joke about this movie at South by is that it sounds like if 30 Rock wanted to make up a fake indie movie that make fun of indie movies, it would be the Peanut Butter Falcon, which is about a man with Down syndrome who escapes from his nursing home to embark on a road trip with a criminal on the run so he could become a professional wrestler. That sounds terrible, but the truth is that Peter Falcon not only won the audience award, which is when the audience members vote on your favorite movies of the festival, but it's genuinely good. It's the directorial debut of Tyler Nilsson and Michael Schwartz, and they actually wrote the film for Zachary Gottsagen, who actually has Down syndrome, who they knew in real life, and then one day they learned wanted to be an actor, so they said, "Well, write a movie for him," and they did. And they managed to cast Shia LaBeouf and Dakota Johnson and Bruce Dern and John Hawkes and John Bernthal and Thomas Hayden Church, like all these real actors in their directorial debut, which actually stars a man with Down syndrome as a man with Down syndrome. And it is sometimes rough and uneven, as you'd expect from a first-time film from anybody, but it is genuinely sweet. It wears its heart on its sleeve. And Shia LaBeouf, who plays the ex-con who takes Zach, the man with Down syndrome, under his wing, and they develop a sort of a big brother, younger brother relationship as they journey through the American South. Shia LaBeouf, I know, is in the middle of a comeback tour right now between this and Honey Boy, and he's fantastic here. This is like a reminder that he's just an incredible actor, and he has a wonderful rapport with Zachary Gottsagen. And I feel like maybe a lot of actors, when paired with a non-actor, may want to make it about themselves or may overwhelm a non-professional like Gottsagen, especially somebody who is, has a disability that we can't, that's noticeable in all the scenes. But they're both not only really funny together, they're really warm together. And Shia LaBeouf knows when it's important for him to let his co-star shine. And working with the directors, I'm assuming, it is not the Shia LaBeouf show, even though he's quietly great. It is the Shia LaBeouf and Zachary Gottsagen show, as these two become like just this pair that I'm going to think about a lot this year when I think about movies I loved. The whole thing is uneven. I'm not so sure I like where it goes. I don't really like what they do with the Dakota Johnson's character, who is the retirement home community worker who's like searching for them. And there's some stuff that just feels a little too cute for its own good. It's definitely quirky in ways that work and ways that don't. But at the end of the day, the filmmakers know this is about these two very different men becoming brother figures as they wander through beautiful landscapes and have really funny conversations about life and wrestling and just what it means to be your own person and live a free life. And I was really charmed and moved by it ultimately. And I really hope this means Zachary Gottsagen gets more work, even though I'm worried that Hollywood will see him and just want to make him into the butt of jokes, which is where they tend to put all actors with Down syndrome. And it's also reminded that Shia LaBeouf is such a generous, like forceful screen presence who can do pretty much anything when he's not having one of his meltdowns.
Yeah. Which, by the way, he was arrested for public drunkenness during the filming of this movie.
Oh, well, I did not know that.
Yeah. This sounds interesting, and nobody has picked this up yet, so there's a chance we might not see this. This sounds like something like, I'm looking at the poster of this, and I could totally see this as something that Netflix would pick up, and it would be like one of those tiles on the screen.
Yeah, if this was 10 years ago, this would have been picked up and made into a Little Miss Sunshine-sized, sleeper hit. But these days, it feels like very much like the kind of thing Netflix would pick up, because people want ape shit for this movie, Peter. Like regular folks and people who don't write about movies for a living, people who just want to enjoy films, they went crazy for this. So it's a real crowd pleaser, and I really hope people get a chance to see it.
Okay, let's talk about your next film, and that is Stuber.
Stuber is one that's tricky to talk about because we were shown a work-in-progress cut of the film, which means it wasn't finished. There were no opening credits, no closing credits. Not all the color correction was done. The director was still working on final editing touches, so I feel weird talking about it in any capacity. But we've written about work in progress cuts.
They are screening it at a public film festival. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. This is a new film from Michael Dowse, who made Goon, the hockey comedy that everybody loves, and which I like. And it's very good. It is a very, very good buddy cop comedy, if you will, where Dave Bautista from Guardians of the Galaxy and Blade Runner 2049, everybody's favorite, high-minded wrestler. Like, pretty much he's opposite The Rock. He's pursuing all kinds of various interesting, challenging roles, whereas The Rock plays The Rock all the time. I love you, The Rock. Mm-hmm. And here he's playing this, rapidly aging cop who's searching for a drug dealer played by Iko Uwais from The Raid, and his eyesight's failing him, and his partner dies in the opening scene, and he's just this old, tired man who's abandoned his family in order to do his job, and he gets laser eye surgery on the same day where he gets a massive break in the case. So unable to drive, he commandeers an Uber being driven by Kumail Nanjiani's Stu, and the rest of the movie is this mild-mannered, progressive young Uber driver clashing with the brutish, meat-headed cop who is forcing him to drive him across L.A. as they get into gunfights and car chases and all kinds of wacky hijinks. And it's very much modeled in the Lethal Weapon, 48 Hours mold, mismatched guys driving around, arguing, yelling, eventually becoming friends. And it's very funny. The action is fine. The action is not going to blow your mind off. But Bautista and Nanjiani are just an instant classic pair. I loved watching these two. Their banter is so good. And it's the kind of movie where it pauses for an extended, never-ending story joke that made me laugh and is still making me laugh. And I'm just fascinated by the dynamic between these two because, it's very much a very classic traditional setup, which is, Bautista's cop's going to teach Nanjiani that it's okay to be a tough guy, and Nanjiani's going to teach Bautista it's okay to cry sometimes. But they're both doing this so well. It is a well-worn template, but these two just I want to see them, maybe not necessarily in a sequel, but in more movies together because they bounce off each other so well.
Yeah, and features a score by Joseph Trapanese. This film is produced by Fox and will be released this summer, July?
Yes.
Yeah, so look out for that. Let's move on to Villains. What is this one about?
Villains was my big narrative surprise. It was one, a lot, unfortunately, for better or worse, a lot of the movies on my list are the major headliner films, when people were actively anticipating, ones that were major screenings. Villains was one that kind of snuck up on me. One of those, I'm going to go see this because I have time to kill, and I loved it, is by directors Dan Burke and Robert Olson. And Peter, have you ever played the tabletop role-playing game Fiasco?
I have not, but I've watched... I think I've watched Will Wheaton play it on the TV show Tabletop.
Well, for those of you who don't know, Fiasco is a game where a group of people sit around a table playing characters, 4 or 5 characters, and they build a scenario where their characters make increasingly poor decisions that eventually lead to everything going wrong for everyone. Villains feels like a game of Fiasco come to life, and it stars Bill Skarsgård, Pennywise from the new It, and Micah Monroe from It Follows, is this incredibly sweet, endearing, but incredibly idiotic and not very smart criminal duo who are robbing stores on a road trip south so they can open a store in Florida. And the movie treats them as being incredibly likable people. We're on board with them. They're not murderers, not killers. They're just idiots with a gun who have a dream. And the car runs out of gas. They see a nearby house in the woods, think, we'll break in that house, steal the car, be on our way, and everything will be fine. And they're not counting on that house being owned by 2 absolute psychopaths, played by Kara Sedgwick and Jeffrey Donovan from Burn Notice. And I was not expecting to say the lead from Burn Notice is one of my favorite performances of South by Southwest.
Oh, wow.
But he's wearing pretty much... He's wearing his best Bill Paxton suit. If the late Bill Paxton was still alive and asked to play a crazy serial killer from the Deep South, he'd be playing this character instead. But ultimately, it's about 4 people, 2 couples who deeply love each other but are on the wrong side of the law in the same house, battling for survival over the course of a few very bad days. As they trade the upper hand multiple times. And it's about. And it's ultimately, if it's about anything, it's about how sometimes you find the person you love in just the completely wrong place, and and sometimes if you think you're the villain, if you're the bad guys, robbing stores, you're going to find someone a lot worse than you if you look hard enough. And it has that sort of early Coen Brothers thing where it's only a handful of characters. It blends, thriller and dark comedy very well. I thought of Blood Simple many times while watching this. And like I said, I think Skarsgård and Monroe are great together. I think Donovan and Cedric are great together. And it's just dueling couples, with dark motivations. I was very much on board with everything this movie was selling me.
Yes, and this has what's her name? Mika Monroe, who I love. I first saw her at Any Price in like 2012, but she's kind of made a huge name for herself. She was in It Follows and what else? The Guest. Yeah, The Guest.
The Guest, and unfortunately, Independence Day Resurgence.
Yeah, well, she should keep to the indies like this.
Yeah. I adore her. I think that she is on the verge of like being a huge star and in the right thing. And I think that a lot of people, the people who are always searching movies for like ideal couples, like couples who are like for all faults like really make sense like as characters. I think a lot of people are going to really dig what her and Skarsgård have in this movie as chemistry.
Yeah, and she's also in Honey Boy, which you should mention because we mentioned that earlier. Okay, let's move on to the next film, and that is Pet Sematary. I know Chris... Wait, did Chris say that Pet Sematary was his favorite Stephen King movie of all time?
I can't remember if he said it was of all time, but he said it's one of the absolute best, and I agree.
Wow.
Yeah, it is.
Wait, so this approaches The Shining by Stanley Kubrick?
The Shining has 30 years of reputation, but I'd put Pet Sematary in the top 5, and that's a weird thing to say.
Okay.
Also, because there are a lot of very bad Stephen King adaptations. I'd say there are a lot more bad than there are good, but I'd say Pet Sematary belongs in the same conversation, in the same paragraph as the 2017 It, and The Shining at the very least. And the Shining comparison also makes sense because what directors Kevin Kolsch and Dennis Widmeyer, who made the indie Starry Eyes, which is really good, you should see it. What they do here is they don't adapt the book directly as much as they try to capture the tone that the book gets across. And Chris wrote this at length in his review, and he's going to be doing a direct comparison between the book, the 2019 film, and the 1989 adaptation as an article for us closer to release, so you can see how all three of them stack up. And they make a major change to the story. It's actually in the trailers if you know the book. But halfway through the movie, a fundamental change to the story's plot occurs that has ripple effects that lead to the back half of the movie being almost completely different from the book in almost every way. There is almost no comparison beyond very, very basic structure. And at first, as a longtime Stephen King reader, I was like feeling that weird tenseness in your shoulders when you're watching an adaptation of something you love and you think, are they going to get this wrong? But the changes they make are so smart and make so much sense of the story they want to tell. I mean, maybe it's not as good as Kubrick's The Shining. I mean, what is? But I feel like Kubrick saw, The Shining as clay that he could reshape to, make his own. And Kolsch and Widmeyer have reshaped Pet Sematary into the movie they want to make instead of the movie Stephen King wrote. And ultimately, it's a decision that works. It comes at the expense of my favorite character in all of Stephen King, Judd Crandall, played by John Lithgow in this movie, gets short shrift. I feel like he gets really cut to the bone when it comes to character development. But that's because clearly Widmeyer and Kolsch were more inspired by other parts of the book and lean heavily into those instead. So I was thinking very hard about this, thinking, would my favorite parts of the book have fit into the actual movie these two are making? And the answer is no. They make decisions that empower their vision, not Stephen King's vision, and that actually makes it an extremely good Stephen King adaptation. And I'm really impressed by the acting. I think Jason Clarke and Amy Seimetz are very good as the leads, the two parents who are moving to a small Maine town next to a cursed area of land that can resurrect the dead. But Jete Lawrence as their young daughter, Ellie, who's really impressive. And it's one of those child performances that kind of blew me away. And I'm very excited for us to maybe have a spoiler cast with Chris in the future to talk about what she does and why she's so good here. And this movie is, and Peter, that's what I emphasize. This is a feel-bad movie. Pet Sematary is a feel-bad book. It's miserable. It's dark. It's about grief. It's about how grief transforms you into something something unrecognizable that you that's something where you make all the wrong decisions to try to fill the hole that has been made in you. But Pet Sematary is also a really good time with the movies. It's darkly funny, it's scary, it's violent. People are screaming and cheering throughout the premiere, and it walks that really fine line of being a wide release Paramount horror film that's going to leave people like, screaming and talking and buzzing, while also filling you full of like that really specific Pet Sematary dread.
Well, it sounds like you and Chris both love this. I've seen some buzz online. It seems like more other people are a little bit more mixed, but it seems like mostly people are really enjoying it.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I've talked to people who were more lukewarm on it.
Yeah.
But Chris and I are both over the moon for it, and Chris was the opinion I was really worried about because this is Chris's favorite book. So I was when I talked to him and he liked it, I was like, oh, thank God I'm not alone. So yeah, so I think that if you like horror in any way, this is going to be something you need to see.
Yeah, I remember he messaged our Slack channel before he was seeing the movie because he was like sitting there in the theater, like just at the peak of anticipation. And I think he said something like, if I don't like this movie, I think I just have to disappear or something like that. And, it's the way I feel whenever I see a new Star Wars movie.
Yeah, very much.
Okay, one of the big films that came out of this festival, South by always has like a big like mainstream comedy kind of hit that kind of breaks out or is like the talk of the fest. And this year I think it was Good Boys. This is the Evan Goldberg, Seth Rogen produced comedy. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Good Boys is directed by Gene Stupnitsky, and Peter, I have not laughed this hard in a long time. There are better comedies I saw at South by this year in terms of like being more complete films that with that resonate more that we'll get to soon enough. But in terms of pure laughter and pure consistent laughter, even when you reach that final 20 minutes where most comedies have to tamp down the laughs to finish the plot, Good Boys is hysterical from beginning to end. And what makes this movie unique, and it's an R-rated comedy, it is filthy, it is raunchy, it is full of drugs and sex jokes, but what makes it really special is that the three main characters are 11-year-old boys who, as the title implies, are good kids. They respect their parents, they respect the authorities, they follow the rules, they do well in school. And the comedy comes from them trying to maintain their structured world as things go horribly wrong for them. I mean, the movie kicks off with them being invited to a kissing party, which naturally is where you have to go kiss girls, and it's where you learn who you're going to marry and who is very important for the rest of your life because you have to make sure they get it right. And
Jacob, I was never invited to any of these kissing parties.
I know, neither was I, Peter. But it's things. But long story short, this is all first act stuff. Is the character played by Jacob Tremblay, who's the lead of the movie, even though the three kids also played by Brady Noon and Keith L. Williams. All three of them are great, and they're all share lead duties. They destroy Jacob Tremblay's character's his father's prized drone, and so they're forced to skip school to find a way to replace it because they're not. And so actually they're already stepping above and beyond what they would do as good kids. Skipping school is the worst thing imaginable. So naturally they start encountering all kinds of wildly escalating bad decisions and bad situations as they start being forced to break all the rules in the name of the greater good because, if they don't save this drone, they could be grounded and no one could go to the kissing party and it'll destroy their lives forever because if they can't do that, then what's the use of being alive anymore? So yeah. It's very much from the perspective of these kids who, have all the, who have not yet learned that somebody who does drugs is not immediately a bad person. So they're seen to come to somebody who's doing drugs and they try to lecture them about how doing drugs is going to destroy their lives. And they don't understand what sex is, but they're very much aware of consent. So they're always constantly concerned about how when I kiss a girl, I need to make sure she consents first. And it's so sweet. Like the comedy itself, even though as filthy as it is, comes to the fact these kids are so innocent, so sweet, and so uncorrupt. And it manages to be so filthy without ever being mean. It's never a cruel movie. It's never vicious, and it never aims down. Yeah. And it's actually a trend to South by this year. I'll get to that in a second. But I feel like Seth Rogen, this is, even though he doesn't write this or direct this, it feels very much like on brand for him. But also on brand that he's grown up a lot since we first saw him in Superbad, Knocked Up. He's, over a decade older and a lot wiser. And the stuff he's supporting these days, the type of comedy he's making, including Long Shot, which I did not see, but apparently has a very similar tone, is how can we be filthy and outrageous while not punching down, while not being cruel, while making sure that, all the usual targets of this type of comedy, from the past are either in on the joke or part of the joke without, being the victim of it. Yeah. And Good Boys does this while being so funny.
And this is Gene's feature directorial debut. He directed some episodes of The Office, which he also co-wrote, I think, over a dozen episodes with his partner Lee, who also wrote this. And he's been writing stuff like Year One, Bad Teacher, but this is his big coming out thing. So
yeah, I think this could be such a huge hit. Like, it is. I know this is such a cliche, Peter. I was literally sore in my throat and my abdomen from laughing. I mean, I hurt. I hurt all over when this was over.
Okay, we have 4 more movies to talk about. We've already gone 40 minutes. Hopefully people are enjoying this. Let's talk about your next one is Tread.
Tread. This is a new documentary from director Paul Solet. Personal trivia. The very first South by Southwest film I ever saw was Paul Solet's Grace, a horror film, literally 10 years ago, South by Southwest 2009. So some kind of full circle thing happened here. But Tread is a documentary about a man in a small Colorado town who transforms a bulldozer into a bulletproof tank and rampages through his town, destroying buildings and causing mayhem. And the National Guard is called, and the police can't stop him. And eventually he gets stuck and kills himself inside his tank. And that's like, and the movie then says, okay, how did this happen? And why did nobody talk about this for more than a day when it happened in 2004? And the fascinating thing here is the man who did this, he left hundreds of hours of audio recordings explaining why he was doing this. So the first third of Tread is essentially his story, his perspective, his audio recordings, his friends explaining why he had this breakdown, why he went on this rampage, why he did something that was so horrible. And then the middle third of the movie is all the people he was targeting and all the townsfolk. They tell their side of the story, and it completely contradicts his story. And there's all these really well shot reenactments in addition to the talking head stuff that like sort of depict different perspectives, how things were from different points of view, and how they clash. And like the first hour of this movie is you wondering who is telling the truth here, who is lying. Either this guy was crazy, and his ramblings in the tapes are unreliable, or everyone who's still alive is lying to the cameras. And I have an opinion based on how things fell when the credits roll.
I think giving your opinion at this point, I feel like is maybe a spoiler, even though it's your opinion.
Exactly. And then the last chunk of the movie is a combination of recreations and actual footage from his actual tank rampage. And it is really unsettling. It is fascinating. And we're in this era where there's so many like true crime docs on Netflix. There's so many of them that are about, missing women and, serial killers. And this was a really, really refreshing kind of true crime doc, one that feels very relevant. I mean, this was 2004, but the idea of a blue-collar white man going on a rampage for reasons that are explored in depth in the film is something that hits a lot harder, I think, to audiences now than it may have in 2004 when this happened. And it feels very timely in a way that the film leans into and is not afraid to acknowledge. And it's one of those things where if you'd written this as a screenplay, if you'd written the details that happen and the interactions and some of the beats, if you'd written them as a fictional screenplay and submitted it, you would have gotten notes back saying this is too implausible, this wouldn't have happened. So the only way to tell a story was a doc. And this hasn't been picked up yet. But I can imagine this being something that appears on Netflix one day, and then everybody at your office or wherever you work says, "Did you watch Tread? It's on Netflix now. It's crazy." So I really hope that somebody realized that this is a streaming hit waiting to happen.
Yeah. It hasn't been picked up yet. Doug Lyman produced this. Hopefully it will find a home somewhere. I love stories that have an unreliable narrator, and especially go into the puzzle of trying to figure out, what the real story is. And so I'm assuming by the end of this film, I'm not sure if this is a spoiler, like, do we have a better idea or not?
I feel like I do.
Okay.
But I also feel like there are certain reveals that happen, some very cleverly, some very quietly, that I think will resonate in different ways for people based on their backgrounds and what they believe.
Okay. Let's move on to the art of self-defense. I know, didn't they set up like a dojo at South by? I saw some photos from that. Like they were.
Fonz PR, who they're a local company who rep a lot of indie films, but also increasingly major films. They have a knack for doing really dramatic press days, and they did press for this in a dojo where apparently you had to challenge certain people to an actual like quote unquote karate battle in order to interview them. It was just very silly, but the movie itself, beyond a silly and headline grabbing press day, the movie itself is fantastic. Meredith Borders reviewed this one for us as well. She gave it a 10 out of 10, and I have a hard time arguing with somebody who loves it that much. This is the next film from Riley Stearns, who made a film called Faults. He played at South by Southwest about 5 years ago. And Faults was a very small, one room, practically thriller. And Art of Self-Defense is a bigger film with more recognizable actors. It's Jesse Eisenberg and Imogen Poots are the two leads. And this is very much Fight Club for 2019. And I say that because both films are ultimately about the same thing. But whereas Fight Club was about the allure of being in a hyper-masculine group, and about how sexy Tyler Durden was, and about how how intoxicating it is to be a part of that kind of tear it all down, embrace your inner man, become primal structure. And of course Fight Club in its final act reveals that, oh no, this is a terrible idea. What have we done? The Art of Self-Defense follows a very, very similar setup, where Jesse Eisenberg's character is mugged and almost killed right outside his home, and joins a karate dojo to learn how to defend himself, and gets slowly pulled into this web of toxic masculinity, where all the people belonging to this dojo just embrace violence and embrace being a man and embrace throwing aside any idea of sensitivity or understanding of other people in favor of you above all else, being a man above all else. And the main villain here of sorts, the who only goes by Sensei, played by Alessandro Nivola, an actor who's been popping up more and more these days in character actor roles. I remember him best originally as the the young guy from Jurassic Park 3. But if you only remember from that, he's like aged into a really fascinating character actor who's been in a ton of things recently. And he's this terrifying Donald Trump-esque figure where you watch him from a distance and go, he is absolutely ridiculous. He is clearly a moron. He's clearly doesn't know what he's talking about. And these people, why are they following? Why are they hanging on to every word? He's clearly leading these young men down a dangerous path and poisoning their minds. And you realize, because that's exactly the point of this. It's entirely a movie. It's also very funny and very absurd in its comedy, but it really lands home and hits hard in its like damning depiction of how in 2019 YouTubers are poisoning young men into thinking you should only act this way if you're a man. You should only act this way because feminists are destroying the world. And it does all this while having this. It's almost fastidious in its design, Peter. There's no set period of time. Like it feels like a vaguely 1994 setting. It's never specified, and it almost reminds me of it's Wes Anderson-like in that every single attention to detail in the production design is very, very specific. That it's framed in very, very specific ways. The characters have very quirky dialogue, but it's not as cute as a Wes Anderson movie. But I feel like it's a good comparison to try to explain how stylized the dialogue is and how stylized the film is. But also, like Wes Anderson's best, it used that style to make you laugh and ease you into some pretty dark stuff.
I am also very excited to see this film. I'll add this to my list as well. Let's talk about your next your penultimate. Our Self-Defense does have release date. Bleecker Street will release it on June 21st of this year, so you will have a chance to see it. Very cool. Okay, let's talk about your penultimate film of the fest, and that is Booksmart. What is Booksmart?
Booksmart is the directorial debut of Olivia Wilde, who you may have seen in a number of movies. She's a very good actress, and it turns out she is a very inspired director. Booksmart is, you could call it Superbad with girls, but I feel that's almost reductive because it's way better than Superbad, and I like Superbad. The basic gist is Caitlin Dever, you may know from Short Term 12 and Justified, and Beanie Feldstein, who was in the Lady Bird's best friend in Lady Bird, are two high school overachievers who on the last day of school, right before graduation, learn that all the idiots in school, all the people who they've ignored and mocked from afar and treated as, lesser than, have all gotten into college and have like careers ahead of them and are doing just as well for their future as they were. And they did it, and they sacrificed all the parties and all the fun and all the hanging out and all the friendships so they can concentrate on college, whereas everybody else did all that and are still doing just as well on the path from graduation. So fed up with it, they decided to use their last night of high school to go out and party as much as possible and try to have all the adventures that they missed over 4 years in one night. And from that, fairly standard setup, it just becomes incredibly funny, but also incredibly heartwarming. It had there's definitely shades of Breakfast Club in there, where Breakfast Club is ultimately a movie about you do not know your fellow person until you know them, until you actually meet them and understand them. And Booksmart follow these characters as they get into a series of comedic incidents, as they stumble from set piece to set piece, party to party, and just all kinds of bad things happen to them, and all kinds of life lessons are learned. And it all happens in ways that I was not expecting. I mean, I feel like I'm describing a very generic comedy here, but it's incredibly sweet. And the relationship between the two characters is just this unapologetically real portrait of how two incredibly uncool people connect. And I'm very much on board with Olivia Wilde as a director. This is far more interestingly shot than most comedies. I mean, Good Boys, which I really liked, it feels like it's shot like a pretty standard comedy, whereas Wilde has an actual eye and her camera's put in interesting places. And every character in this movie just feels real. It feels authentic. And I want to spend time with all of them. And I am in love with this movie. I'm in love with all the characters, even the ones who seem like idiots. And I'm thrilled for Olivia Wilde making more movies. I am thrilled for Caitlin Dever and Beanie Feldstein hopefully being a big breakout from this movie. And Annapurna is releasing this summer on May 24th, actually. And I hope they sell this right, because it feels like it should be a classic. It feels like it should be the kind of movie that people like count up there with Breakfast Club was Superbad, and it feels like it's as emotional as something like The Edge of 17, but with bigger laughs.
I'm sorry, Jacob. Nobody pays to see the Annapurna movies. And... we talked about this on the podcast last week. They're just almost every single one of them has kind of not made its money back. So it's, but this is such like a crowd pleasing mainstream movie that works. It has the Annapurna thing in that it's extremely well done and extremely and full of actors you've seen in a lot of indie stuff, as well as appearances from major comedy stars. Will Ferrell, Adam McKay produced this. I was going to say, Olivia Wilde got Jason Sudeikis in this movie. How did she pull that off?
Because they're married.
Yes, I know.
But there's also, Will Forte, Lisa Kudrow, Jessica Williams. There's a lot of people you'll recognize in this, and I feel like I keep on feeling I'm risking overhyping this movie because I've been talking about it so much. And for everyone I talk to at South by, film critics and regular film fans fell in love with this movie. And if something can save Annapurna from itself, if Annapurna can get a $100 million hit, if they market Booksmart well enough, I think that could be it, because I can't imagine people not embracing this movie. It's very special. And I'm very much in love with it.
Okay, cool. Let's now move on to your number one film of the festival, which I think everybody has probably figured it out by now, is Jordan Peele's film Us.
Yeah, I talked about Us when Ben and I did a podcast last week to do a South by update. And, Get Out was my favorite film of that year. And I was super concerned it'll be a sophomore slump, that it would be more of the same, or him, reaching too far. And Us is this perfect combination of him, reaching further than Get Out. It's a more expensive movie. It's a bigger movie. The ideas are bigger. The scope is bigger. But he has such a firm grasp on what he's doing. And if you see the trailer, this is about a family who is under siege in their home by a quartet of doppelgangers, people who look just like them and know everything they know. And that family is led by Lupita Nyong'o and Winston Duke, who worked together previously in Black Panther. And so everybody in this movie is playing dual roles. It's Winston Duke playing him and his doppelganger, and Lupita Nyong'o playing her and her doppelganger. And Winston Duke is the source of comic relief in the movie. He's so funny. He's like this great corny dad. And I did an interview with Jordan Peele where we talked about how like there's never been a great black corny dad in movies. So he was thrilled to write that character and to have Winston Duke play him. And I'm glad Winston Duke's here making some really good authentic laughs happen, because the rest of the film is very dark, darker than Get Out. And Lupita Nyong'o is doing sort of this spellbinding work here. I know in the past we talked about how Toni Collette should have gotten an Oscar nomination for Hereditary. And there's always this running trend of like great horror performances not being recognized properly for being amazing until, a decade or two later. So I say now what Lupita Nyong'o is doing here in his dual role as mother of the family and the leader of the doppelgangers who are menacing them is just the kind of work that like I feel like is going to last, because I was blown away by it. And what she's doing physically in this role and what she's doing emotionally with both characters is just nothing short of incredible. And I feel like ever since 12 Years a Slave came out, she's been off the radar, either by choice or because, Hollywood doesn't know what to do with her, really. And Us is like this grand reminder that there's a reason why she won an Oscar, at such a young age. And there's a reason why she's so exciting. And she is so game for these ridiculous things that Jordan Peele's asking you to do, and she's selling them with such terrifying reality. And for the first half of this movie, I was thinking, okay, this is really good. This is funny. This is terrifying. Lupita Nyong'o is doing fascinating things. But what's this movie about? And then, like Get Out, there's maybe a moment where you realize what the social commentary here, what the Twilight Zone-esque message beneath all the horror is. And it's not as spelled out as Get Out. I had to dwell on it for a little bit before I feel like it really crystallized for me. But the message is not explicitly about race as it was with Get Out, but it's about stuff that we're talking about all the time in America. It's about stuff that is still making headlines. It's about stuff that is a major conversation that news media is afraid to talk about. And here it is embedded in the text of an extremely entertaining, extremely scary, extremely fun horror film that like will have you screaming and laughing. And when it's over, probably really troubled by, its message. And I'm looking forward to running my interview with Jordan Peele where we talk about it at length and spoilers, because that's what you want to do when the movie's over. You want to have a conversation about what it's saying. And right now, Peter, this is the front runner for my favorite film of the year so far. It means nothing comes close. And
wow.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm here for Jordan Peele making this kind of stuff for the rest of his career. If he wants to keep making horror movies that resonate beyond being scary and has something to say about what America is and where we're going, this is the kind of horror film I want forever. Bring it on.
Okay, those are strong words. I'm going to get to see this tomorrow night. This film comes out to the general public on March 22nd, so in about later this week, right?
Yeah, later this week. And just be careful of spoilers, because I think this is more easy to spoil than Get Out. And the back half of this film, everything you see in the trailers, almost all of it is from either the first half or the first half hour. Hats off to Universal's marketing team, like mwah, mwah, mwah to all of you, because the trailers sell this film perfectly without spoiling any of the best surprises. So go into this one knowing that the trailers have not ruined it for you.
Hopefully that pays off. I feel like there's few filmmakers that can pull that off, just of like marketing a film on their name. And I feel like that's what this film is doing. I feel like what they're showing is not much, and they're really trying to get people to come out just based on Jordan Peele alone.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And this, what, Peter? Can we have a spoiler podcast after this comes out? Because I want to talk about Us. I think you will too.
Yeah. Well, I'll see it tomorrow. So yeah, we'll talk about it. You can read about all the films that Jacob saw at South by. He did daily diaries for the site. We will link those in the show notes. Jacob, where can we find more of your work online?
Oh man, I'm on Slash Film every single day, doing something on that site. I'm complaining about Twitter, or I'm complaining about Twitter on Twitter at Jacob S. Hall.
You can find more of my work at Slash Film on all social media. You can find this podcast, Slash Film Daily, published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And please head on over to our iTunes page. Give us a 5-star rating. Write us a couple nice thoughts. Tell your friends. Spread the word. And we'll see you tomorrow with a water cooler episode, the first in over 2 weeks. So join us then.